back into the walk. I really had to use the restroom. Feeling fueled. I'll be doing like 2 more days of live streams, and then I'll be just posting up. Probably doing a little bit more editing on workout videos, changing the lighting a little bit and approaching it with a little different focus. And otherwise, feeling solid. I cooked some beef liver this morning, so like most of what you're doing when you're doing like natural bodybuilding, and it is bodybuilding. Like to compare a natural next to someone using even minor PEDs, even just TRT, no one wants to see a natural arm. Like, and this brings in a really considerable dialogue when it pertains to peptides. And even more so, to put myself on spectacle and to say, well, doesn't that also imply past PED use? And this is a conversation that I've needed to have for quite some time, actually. This is extremely pertinent, and I've got extensive experience in this area. Like if you create a list of PEDs, of every PED, right? I've done 60% or greater of a very complete and total list of PEDs, even including things that are more fringe and speculative as far as whether or not they're just agents that were designed to kill people off, such as like M1T. That was probably the worst feeling, the worst experience that I've ever had, was doing that more synthetic version. But you're going to find more people using that as time goes by. And now, that used to be called rat poison in the bodybuilding community. And it is now glorified because it's cheaper. It's much easier to manufacture over time, that is. Synthetics on every level of everything are going to become, this is all part of the AI push. Is a lot of people don't realize it, but many hybrid metals and building materials such as graphene and the use of nanorobotic structures that can actually be altered and moved. So you could have a piling or an entrance exit that could be recombinated and moved, made of such light materials, right? But actually create this solid ant-like grip by the billions to the adjoining surface, and then can be disassociated and disparately moved to another location, right? So you're talking about the road actually being something that becomes technologically advanced, right? To the point where there will be a jurisdictional dictation of when road systems will even be able to be traveled. So when you get into the fact that the elite, or the so-called populist elite, right? Not the true elite, but those who capitulated and sold out long ago and are flying around in their little, there's this whole approach where where the powers that be said, no, we're not going to call these personal aircraft we're approaching this from another standpoint where we're starting with these drones, linking the drones in, satellites to the AI, right? And then we are going to introduce and engineer transport from that level, right? To where people aren't flying, there's not going to be any accidents. As soon as one craft slows down, the one in back's going to slow down. If they almost hit one another, if that did ever happen, they'll link together, right? There'll be an electromagnetic buffer there. We're talking about like the octopus can represent an Operation Gladio perspective. A spider, wings and arms, right? But it can also represent a mind state of how the combinant ontological efforts that are done from the nexus, the core, right? Where you're not thinking about a sagittal movement or a frontal plane movement or a transverse movement. You're not stuck into this patternization. You're using the thought of torsion field states, right? And spin velocity, right? To mathematically perceive the gap between 2 points in time. Yeah, it's getting warm in here. So the hybrid body is going to be using more spin gyration techniques and efforts, right? We see this evident with the limbs that are being produced for people who don't have hands, and they're able to remove their hands, and their hands can prosthetically, they can move on their own, they can think on their own, they can stay attached to the impulses, the nervous system of the operator, or they can be taken over at any time by a central system. It's pretty scary. I mean, can you imagine your arm or your hand turning against you and killing you? Right? Or chaining or disallowing you, right? Holding you hostage or holding you until these robotic authorities can get there, right? I mean, in a sense, you're talking about Minority Report, but it's on a whole different level. Because once you have the torsion field, the spin gyration, you now have something that can generate its own energy, right? You have something that can amass itself into a pendulum and kinetically create its own energy. It doesn't need solar power. It doesn't need energy from any other source. It just needs to understand how to use the minimal aspects, right, from a binary code perspective, right, to where protection and storage becomes the effort. A cache, a data storage set. So in other words, how much does it take for something to be able to become as impenetrable as the tip or the head of a Prince Rupert's drop, to become an impenetrable device through its just the lattice work of how it's laid out. So it is warm in here. It is uncomfortable, but it's not. I mean, this is the Monterey Peninsula. It's only 70 degrees, so most people will be like, "Oh, what are you bitching about?" But it is next to the ocean, right? So even when you look at the weather, right? It's 70 degrees, but it feels like 76 Because if you're not just standing right next to the ocean and experiencing the wind chill, you're not really getting that cool off, right? And like everywhere, the sun doesn't work like it used to. It's like this low quality sunlight that just fucking burns you. You know, I realized that some years back. I'm like, this is not. Now you could argue and say, oh, you know, you don't want to go out during noonday sun, right? But it's like, what other option do you have? It's like it takes so long, you know, throughout the year. We're talking about, you know, an amalgamation of the entirety of a year in most places. It takes a while for, like up in Sacramento where it got really hot, it takes a while for that morning mist to burn off, and right? I mean, you still have a sort of inclement flux going on there throughout a 24-hour period. But for the most part, when people on the East Coast and the Midwest laugh at Californians like, what the hell are you bitching about? You don't have, you know, most of these areas other than the mountainous areas, you don't have snow, you don't have this. It's true. People are very, very coddled and babied, and you see that evident with the, I think it's like 50 million people here now. And the people who end up coming here suck. It's just an energy. It's a pervading energy that really causes one to question. Like there's this, like you'd think, so some people are aberrant and subversive to, as joiners. The last thing they want to do is join into a collective mind, a hive mentality. In other words, see how the locals click in an area, try to fit in, try to be as aesthetically pleasing and be the hero to everybody, and everybody, you have to go through this litmus test of whether or not you're liked or disliked, right? There's that, right? On a conditional state, even people who are very antisocial for the most part, they have these expectations and this is what gets into like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Pierre Proudhon and many others who have looked at this and understood that they had to philosophically pioneer this area of the social contract, right? And when J.J. Vance, Operation GCD, is discussing the Society of the Cincinnati, the Odd Fellows, you know, all these subsets and groups, that is what the main discussion hinges on. We are talking about social contracts, okay? And even more so, it gets into the areas of Jordan Maxwell, Russell Pine, right, aka Jordan Maxwell, who sadly wasn't respected, and his work wasn't respected by the internal mechanisms that were even so I mean, like Michael Tsarian, highly educated, there's that famous interview with him and Jordan Maxwell on Coast to Coast, where Michael Tsarian was working as an apologetic lineman, you know, backing up Jordan Maxwell, going, look, you can refute this guy. You can say he doesn't really have much of an education. He's not a historian, but because Michael Tsarian was so perspicacious, and this is before he even had finished his education. So at this time in this interview, he's like, I'm not there either. I'm not, you know, highly educated, but I'm looking into this. Well, he ended up completing a higher education and going into this and really studying it. And I would say that Michael Tsarian is being overlooked, just like Jason Reza Georgiani. In fact, not to go off on too much of a side trail here, but you see where people like Jeffrey Mishlove, you know, it's like, oh, he's just such a nice guy. He's such a pally. And then his connection to Robert Bigelow, right, winning that award, where Robert Bigelow was trying to figure out and get some of the best minds involved with, right, asserting what the fuck's going on the other side in this liminal death zone. Like, he lost so many people and went through so much grief in such a short period of time. Grandson, son, grandson, and wife. And then on top of that, through his ownership of Skinwalker Ranch, came full force, face to face, I believe, because everything that he does and the look in his eyes, and as he talks about this, and when he talks about the hitchhikers, and then Tim, God, what the fuck was his name? Tim Taylor. There's Tyler. I think there was Tyler and there was Tim Taylor. And this is the CIA asset guy. I think this is Tyler that worked through Skinwalker Ranch with Robert Bigelow. And then there was the Tim Taylor, like Tool Time Tim. That's a different person. That's a whole nother subject. I've gone on pretty deep with that one as well, but I'm not going to go off on any side trails with that at present. But I want to pull this back in toward Jeffrey Mishlove and say that here you have this Jewish, liberal Jewish person who's connected with Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow is a little wishy-washy and a little liberal, right? And this is what ends up happening through these formative CIA operations where people don't know what to believe. They may even initially go into this subcontracting with the government, being more conservative, and then when they walk back out, they don't know what the fuck to believe because they're looking at reality as a more malleable, non-hard surfaced, no real nexus or core to it, pliable state in flux, right? So I find that Jason Rizzo-Giorgiani, so the connection with that is Jeffrey Mishlove. The reason you don't see him on a New Thinking Aloud, Jason Rizzo-Giorgiani, and these interviews were very needed, in my opinion. Like there needed to be a whole series of Jason Rizzo-Giorgiani on New Thinking Aloud. And the reason it didn't happen, and Jason talked about this, and he was talking about how Jeffrey thought he was too radical, to the right, too conservative. And I believe that Jeffrey very well, I'm not going to say anything about him, but I'm saying there's different types and brands of homosexuality, right? So you do have conservatives that aren't complete and total perverts. They might be people that were born a certain way, but the majority of the time they're trying to live with severe childhood trauma and make a life out of it, right? There are those people who exist. They may not be the majority, right? But you can see how certain people are attracted to more deviant type lifestyles, right? And everybody, when they're young, goes through certain expressions, right? There's those sort of wild notions, sowing your oats sort of thing, right? And in the end, it's just sort of finding this calibration, right? And in the end, you're not going to be turning toward your identity sexually at all. You're going to realize this is an energy. This is a pulsing source of energy as you get older and you get more mature and you're not being led by your hormones or a cymatic dictating instrumentation and psionic asset infused pumping out of occulted rituals that are pumping an ideation toward deviant behavior out into the field, right? So you could even look at this and go, it's not in the water that's like, let's take this as a postulate with Alex Jones. It's not in the water that's making the frogs gay. You know, we're just sort of paraphrasing on side chain here. It's the influence of the cymatics to where the frog doesn't even have to be a highly developed creature. It's working on a primal state with the limbic system and making people gay. And then when you get into this, and the whole reason we talk about this is because we get into the programmed killers. Everything from Ted Kaczynski, right? His higher level IQ and him being purportedly a, right, cross-dressing type guy. I mean, this is what they try to say. And then now, supposedly, I saw underneath the Underclass podcast, somebody had said that's 5 trans mass murder suspects now. And then somebody underneath goes, no, it's more like 9, right? And so the historicity here, not only with these higher IQ individuals like Alan Turing, right, being homosexual, and I'm going to tell you, Gary Nolan is also on that list. If you're going to make a list, I mean, it's not like we're making a list and pointing fingers. Oh, you're gay. You're gay. I mean, come on. Like, there's so many. Look at the time we're in, right? 2025. But it's to say that what makes you gay? You are gay. What makes you gay? Why are you gay? Right? That's a real penetrating question. Literally, because it's like, why are you gay? What's promulgating you? Why are you intelligent or imbibed with, infused with information from a mathematical sense where it doesn't really make sense how intelligent you are, how many patents you've taken out, the way you think, but even more so, you're gay on top of that? Like, what's going on here, right? And when it's just this wishy-washy notion, as opposed to going, look, that's the agenda's backup mechanism to say we got information on you, or we need to know 100% that you are controllable on a physical level, on a physical scale, before we are downloading information into your head. And even, I mean, come on, look at that picture of Nikola Tesla where he's all cocky and kind of tilting back and stuff. I mean, how deep does this go, right? Literally, how deep does this go? So then you get into this area of these programmed killers who are also not stupid, right? Like there's been some deep dives, and I urge you to look into it. Underclass podcast really was diving into this. And so you got Austin Wade Picard and his co-host Jose, I don't remember his last name, but then he'll have Jules from, I think, the Headless Giant. Really good shows, but they're going into this, they're looking at it, and it's starting to leave this question open as to, okay, you can go right into people's heads. You have this patented technology. McDonald's can advertise right in people's heads. Even more so, a comment that I posted up under the last Underclass podcast was, holy shit, this is getting me thinking about this technology where people, like, it's been admitted that McDonald's has either developed or is in the process of developing a technology where they've actually taken out patents and have gotten the green light to be able to advertise right into people's heads in their dreams, right? So what is that gray area, right? Because you see the Chinese, they can call anybody, this is very critical and important from a global legalistic standpoint of what's considered the goy kind of thing, right? Where it's like, well, once you break this social contract and you're deemed a criminal, they can harvest your fucking organs, right? So, I mean, how far is this going to go? And then when you look at the despotic um, efforts and the total sellout that Trump is, it's just like, holy fuck, where are we going with this, right? He's buddy with Putin. He's buddy with Z, right? So, this is a broad area of speculation, obviously, but the level of control is all you have to do, back to this planned murder operation, right? That's been ongoing for a very long time. And I urge you to see the most recent Underclass podcast, because they're talking about this. But they're not talking about it from the perspective that I am right now, but they're leaving that there. They're going into it. But this is a whole other area, because then you really have to look for a signature. Like, what does that look like? If you're taking serious the gay frog thing from the beginning, then you're looking at the amplification effect of, oh, wow, you got all these higher-minded people who are developing all this technology, and they're gay, and they're most likely being leveraged by their own lifestyles. And then you look at these program killers, and they're gay, right? And they're being overwritten, right? Let's look at a pattern here. And then it's like, well, how would we find that pattern? And it's like, well, you need to find either the alchemical concoctions or modification in that person's DNA, right? Maybe it's a birth thing. These are long-running programs, right? And maybe there is a wave or a frequency. Yeah, I'm saying it. A gay frequency. Okay? A gay frequency. That there is an amplification in certain jurisdictional areas and zones where there must be, under this postulation, a measurable frequency wave pattern that is being distributed broadly. And so when you start to look at behaviors, metropolitan behaviors, and you see how this is collected in certain areas, you could go onto the argument of, well, no, people are attracted to the area. And it's like, are they attracted, or are they attracted in the sense that they're being brought there, right? Because then you get into the subset of, you have these specific types of individuals like Peter Thiel, who's also gay, right? And you'll see down on the community post how I posted up that there's this snippet that Red Panda Koala put up, and it's like, there Joe Rogan is. He's talking about going to this meeting, and he's like, well, how did you meet with this person? How'd that come to be? And it's like, well, I was over at Peter Thiel's house having lunch, right? It's like, what the fuck were you doing over at Peter Thiel's house? And then you see the connection, not only with Elon Musk to Peter Thiel, right? But you see Jesse Michaels. And that's where the shit really starts to come apart, because it's like, holy shit, you don't know much about Jesse Michaels, do you? And then, let's go further with Jesse Michaels. Did you ever see the interview? I gotta stretch my shoulder out here. With Jesse Michaels from a few years back. God, I think it's more like 4 or 5 years ago. With Alex Jones. Talk about gay frogs. Alex Jones was this fat, the Alex Jones and the persona that he, Alex Jones is all about the persona, right? But the persona that he was exhibiting, where he seemed very alone, very accused, had that $1 billion lawsuit thrown on him. Alex Jones, he seemed fruity. Look at that interview. He seemed fruity. And so you start to look at these, the psionic assets, but the cymatics that are involved with this, and you go, were they pumping, or do they pump Alex Jones with one of these frequencies? Is that his ideation? It almost seems like everything he does is like, you're not going to make me gay. You're not going to push me into a cosmos or a universal world where Alex Jones is gay. And then he does everything that he can do to say, no, Alex Jones is not gay. Alex Jones is Alex Jones. And then you see him and he flips, right? He flips. Like, what? Look at him all soft and aging without the testosterone on Joe Rogan just like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Look at those interviews. It's insane. Like, when you see this person, this is a person who is split. Split. Nuts. Doesn't have a core. So then when you get into, my whole point to this is when you get into somebody who can be broken, right? Like, how easier or better would you jailbreak a person to where you can hack in and use them as an avatar? Now, I'm not saying every gay person is a terrible person and broken. That's not what I'm saying, okay? That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, under the discovery of this being manufactured, this changes things a lot, right? Like, how much technology does it take? Like, we're thinking about estrogen, right? They want you to think of that. We're thinking about maybe an amygdala response or a heightened amygdala. But what I'm talking about is I'm talking about a more global systemic effect to the physiology where they're actually stimulating certain areas that are affecting glandular excretions, glandular bodies. We're talking about some really deep shit here. So what does this do? Then psychologically, the person breaks down. Well, isn't this what the Nazi tests are all about? Is how do we break someone down? How do we put them into a position where they are face to face with other people? They are in this government collection of, like, Anna Luna. She was a fucking stripper. You know, she obviously has a history with a promiscuous sexual nature. Jason Reza Giorgiani did a whole paper on this shit. So when you see people, and this goes deeper, so it's like this compromising of fidelity, to where you got somebody who's on two tracks. They're going to college. They have certain aspirations. They've always been sexually deviant. They don't know why, right? To themselves. And then psychologically, they're trying to piece this together and make themselves into better people. And then suddenly they're given this quote unquote opportunity, right? For advancement. This opportunity to level up, this opportunity for a job, or, you know, and so on the psychology of it is they're trying to remedy and balance themselves out on one side, right? They're trying to go through life, have a career and so forth, prove to themselves, that's not what I am. I'm not a slut. I'm not a fag. I'm not a this. I'm not a that, right? But then you have these cymatic wave patterns, like I say, not just a gay frequency, but you also have a promiscuous frequency that's probably not too much different being pumped out, where it's like, how do you take away the male aggressive component that stands up, right? That becomes not just the alpha, but like the omnipresent male force, and then ignites other males, you know, the Vikings, right? Or at least the proposition of that, and to say, you have a whole group of people, barbarians, who are not putting up with shit. And we're, you know, we like to reduce these acts of war to a physical state. But when you have this group of people who know they're being attacked, and they know that they're being attacked from, say, a quasi-spiritual witchcraft level. Now, JJ Vance gets into this as well on his show, where he doesn't go too deep into the esoteric, but he looks with other historians, right? And that's what I'm going to call them, and goes, look, how many fucking wars have been centered around witchcraft? Because I can tell you that my lineage came here in the 1700s after a 100-year war in Pfungstadt, Germany, right on the German side, that said, you know, we're getting the fuck out of here. Witchcraft propagated war. Like, so people like to dismiss this, but it's like, if you were to get down to the fact that these psionics, cymatics, and full on, to be able to alter the localized sphere of an area with technology to where thoughts and outcomes through thoughts, through cathartic motivations of emotional attack would actually manifest into people having their heart stop in their chest, maybe even ushering in what either might be entities, right? So this gets into more esoteric, occult type grimoire and literature based around witch or literature and so forth, right? But really leads into things like the red right ritual that evicts someone from their body prior to or at birth and allows the transference of this druid or high level witch practitioner to be able to evict someone from their body and take over their body, right? So we need to ask ourselves, and this is the area where I'm always, I think that's why my opinion is speculative to people and not so popular, and it's odd because I don't go off on a trail and go, oh no, this is all spiritualism, this is woo woo. I go, well, look, let's face this practically. If we can't prove how long higher forms of technology have been around, right, and the fact that this is far more advanced than we even could ever even rationally be told or look at. Like, for the longest time, Vimana was thought as a spiritual craft, right? Then you begin to look at it and you go, well, technologically, maybe you could turn anything into a flying ship or a craft, right? Like, what would you need? Like when you get into the anti-gravitic aspect, right? Why Amy Eskridge was killed off, really. So what I'm saying is, under the guise of witchcraft, and even more so, women thinking, right? And this gets into Nathaniel Gillis' work a little bit. I don't like to cite him too much. Don't have a lot of respect for the guy. I don't like him. Like I posted some information, and then he's like, I know where you're coming from. I'm not. You're gonna have to give me a break, right? When he was talking to me, and he just wanted. There's kind of a weird energy that he has. A little weird. I'm not going to get too speculative or accusatory, but and I don't see his work as being that pertinent or viable above what Steve Muir and Barry Fitzgerald and many other people around that area are doing. You know, I don't see his contributions. He's weird, right? And he tries to be weird, and I think his agenda is suspect. I'm going to say it. I think his overall agenda isn't one of helping. He's really trying to create a career and kind of laughs and mocks the field that he's in, right? That's how I come off, you know, with all the interviews that I've watched him in. Not a fan, but I try to, if I see an area that somebody's investigating in and it makes some sense and I want it to make more sense and I want to see if the person's full of shit. So I watch a fucking 100 interviews and I see the same regurgitated information and then borrowed or stole information from other people where it's like, wait, he's saying this, you know? So I do see Nathaniel Gillis as being highly suspect. I don't vet or validate him. And I think he's actually doing, I think he's a practitioner. And I think he's fallen under the guise of thinking that spiritualism is going to, you know, you see the weird garb that he wears, where it's like, I think he's using Jewish mysticism. I really do. I think Nathaniel Gillis is using Jewish mysticism to advance a career. And he's selling, and he's trying to go under the guise of the postulate of that he's just a good old guy and he's trying to help everybody. But I don't think that's what's happening. And so when I see someone like that, I see someone who could be an avatar quite easily. I think he's actually making himself available to this shadow portion of the government that is like I have no respect for them, obviously, who are supplicating themselves to being used just for monetary advancements. To say, look, mom, look, dad, look what I did, right? And selling off their principles, if they ever had them, because I think that certain people come from a Jewish mysticism background, and I think that he is more than likely one of these backup Khazarians, if you will, for lack of a better, backup Pharisee, right? Somebody who's not the first in line, but wants to be that next person who gets taken over by this technology, and doesn't care if it is technology, and doesn't care whether or not they're posturing or postulating to other people that maybe this is spiritualism. I think that the technological aspect, that the spiritualism might not even be able to take place without this technological venue or ability or throughway, right? To segue what's called spiritualism into a working order of a manifestation where it affects the outside world, cause and effect, right? So I was talking about Jason Rizzo-Giorgiani and discussing Michael Tessarian. I think Michael Tessarian's really on this, right? But I think I would love to see the two of them somehow working together, right? Two minds that they have working together. But these people all have their own agenda. Like, you know, Jordan Maxwell and David Icke for a while were considered synonymous with one another with what they're saying, believe it or not. Then you had other people that came on the scene that seemed to be working as disinformationalists, right? I mean, you know, Randall Carlson, I'm not saying he's a disinformationalist, but what I'm saying is, you know, David Wilcock for sure, right? I mean, you can see it, and I'm not putting Randall Carlson in the David Wilcock category or Billy Carson category, but what I am saying is these people are given a little bit of information and they exploit it, right? But what I am saying about Randall Carlson is that he is a Mason, right? And that he's trying to work his way up through the Masonic chain, the Masonic order. So how neutral and removed can a person be at that point? In other words, the end-all goal of what he's doing is no longer speculative. He's recruiting for the advancement of the Freemasons, the Masonic order. In other words, the end-all goal is to bring people into the fold. You have to get away from the idea that there's this news reporting, north, east, west, and south. Right? And you're going to take that from the whole Wichor literature aspect of what that really means, right? The elements and the directions, the cardinal, right? You're just going to remove all that. And you're going to just look at it forensically and say, the postulation of a society and a people exists. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You have these individuals, you have the social contract, you have this expectation, and then you have this supplication to a government agency that's going to give you more stuff, but more so, make it so that you're not attacked by your neighbor through what was termed in the past as witchcraft or spiritual warfare, right? And so gravity, I know this is a huge jump, but the fact that Amy Eskridge, anti-gravitics, many of the top leading physicists, I'm going to leave you with this, that gravity itself could be the suppressive element, right? That keeps us from not only being able to transmit, right, kinetic information from one place to another, from one person to the other. And this gets into like the 100 monkey thing going on there, where it's like information that should just be transposed from one generation to the other, right? Where you have the genetic information, you should be able to just amass and then continue on with what your father and your forefather did. Imagine how expert would be. Imagine how much ability people really have or would have, right? So you have this suppression that's being clouded over, heavily governed, that leads directly into nuclear force, what's holding us together, what's forcing us, our cells, right? The energy that's trapped and individualized, disparately compartmentalized, held apart, right? So our souls are being held hostage. But we willingly went into this, or maybe we didn't, but at some point, right, through the social contract, our forefathers went into this. We went into this debt system. And that this leads into the further development of even more control mechanisms that lead toward this postulate of an octopus or a spider, right? Through this control, this mechanism of mechanistic control arm arbitrary system that now dictates what we are thinking, what we are feeling. And I would even, I'll end it here, posit to say that the gravity of the situation, the gravitons that don't exist, the anti-gravity that's being postulated, which is the free state of being in existence, the removal of that artificial, synthetic, moon-based, operational, right? When talking about operations, what bigger operation would there be than to subject and preclude people from being who they are, right? And kill them off, right? Kill them off with this artificial concept of gravity, right? And even more so, I don't know if you've noticed, but people talk about huge environmental changes. I personally feel like they've modified that. Like maybe you couldn't look at that on any sort of scalable level and say, oh, gravity's increased. But for the longest time, people were arguing against the poles and the polarity, right? and polar shifts, electromagnetic shifts. And maybe it's not something that could be measured outright with a compass or even equipment, right? That is readily available, and that this is happening on a whole nother level. And maybe, just maybe, we are actually able to not only jump and move and live without the constraints that gravity, this artificial inference of gravity, does to us physiologically, right? But that it actually keeps us from doing things like being able to, I'm not going to say fly, but maybe, who knows?